The Las Vegas Raiders have hired a new head coach, bringing back interim head coach Antonio Pierce, former Giant great. And we're here to talk to our Giants beat writer at the New York Post, Paul Schwartz, about Antonio Pierce. How you doing, Paul?
Good, Ryan. Usually, I will take off the hoodie and put on something a little more presentable for a video. But considering the subject we're going to talk about, Antonio Pierce, he is a hoodie guy. He is a hoodie kind of guy. He's a get down and dirty. That's what made Giants fans love him. I think that's why the Raiders players love him. So I think this is appropriate for the occasion, so to speak. Okay.
It's definitely appropriate. And Antonio Pierce, obviously removing that interim tag, seemed to be a big thing in that Raiders locker room. You heard from Max Crosby, Devontae Adams, two of the biggest stars on that team, giving their full-fledged support for Antonio Pierce to get that head coaching job after they fired Josh McDaniels midway through the point last year. So, Paul, I want to talk to you about the man that Antonio Pierce is, the player he was, and what kind of coach he can actually be for this Raiders team. So I'll start right there. From your time in covering Antonio Pierce and what you saw the job he was able to do last year with the Raiders, what kind of coach do you think the Raiders are getting with Antonio Pierce here?
Well, I wasn't sure he was going to go into coaching, but if ever there was a coach on the field, it was Antonio Pierce. If you want to, I can talk, well versed on Antonio Pierce. If you could ever get Steve Spagnuolo on here, he would give you an hour. He and Antonio Pierce were like, you know, thick as thieves as coach, coordinator and team captain and team leader. He would relay the calls into Antonio Pierce. Pierce would give them to the rest of the teammates. And they were very close. And Steve Spagnuolo said he knew the defense as well or better than I did. So clearly the intellect for being a defensive guy who could be a leader was there. He was a team leader. He got there in 2005. It did not take him long to be a team leader. Now, he was not a great player. Physically, he was not big enough, not fast enough, average strength, incredibly smart, packed a punch, tough guy. He came from a tough neighborhood. I think he was, the West Coast. He's a tough guy. He brought a tough guy persona to the team. That they don't win the Super Bowl without him. And that was a time, don't forget, Ryan, where the Giants brought in free agents. They struck gold. Now they had Eli, they had Brandon Jacobs, they had Osi, they had Tuck, they had Strahan. They had their Mod Bridge, or they had their Chris Snee, deal. They had their homegrown guys, but without these free agents, who, by the way, was the purview of Dave Gettleman at the time, who was the pro personnel director, and that's where he really made his name in football. Antonio Pierce, you could argue, was the best free agent signing they've ever had. Kareem McKenzie, the right tackle, you could argue, was the best free agent signing on that team. Plaxico Burress, you could argue, was the best free agent signing on that team. Sean O'Hara was great. Sam Madison was great. So they augmented beautifully, and none did more than Antonio Pierce.
Yeah, Antonio Pierce, like you said, it just a guy that really took the world by storm. He was one of those key cogs in that defense, especially on that championship run. And I think what's interesting is he's won that how he was able to win that locker room, and considering that state of what the Raiders look, Paul, you've covered the NFL forever. You've seen how a coach can lose a locker room really quickly, right? And Pierce was able to take that locker room by storm, rattle off a couple of wins with a guy in Aiden O'Connell as his quarterback, questionable offensive coordinating situation, but they won a couple games down the stretch and were still in it towards the end. So ultimately, how do you see this playing out with Antonio Pierce? Do you see him having a successful coaching career here and a real opportunity with the Raiders?
Well, now comes the hard part, right? He was operating with somebody else's coaching staff. Now he has to bring his own guys into the room. I read from NFL Network, Mike Garafolo tweeted that Tom Coughlin is helping him kind of assemble a staff and things like that, which just is tremendous teamwork, right? That Tom Coughlin, who's really out of the game in a lot of ways now, really he is out of the game, but that he's helping a guy who helped him win a Super Bowl. That's just, that's a real Giants flavor to this Raider team. Look, I saw his first game he coached when he was elevated to the interim coach. They destroyed the Giants. And I think Antonio Pierce's toughness won over the locker room. Now, the guy who he replaced, McDaniels, was not popular. Okay, so Antonio Pierce was not the coordinator; he was a linebackers coach. He's never even been a defensive coordinator in the NFL. So now this is a big leap for him. Taking off that interim tag, there was not a lot of pressure on him. Now there is. He's got to get first and foremost an offensive coordinator, right? He's a defensive guy. That is his most important hire. He's got to fill in that staff. Probably got to find a quarterback. So, he went 5-4 in 9 games. That was terrific. I still think they're a rebuilding team and a work in progress, but and I think it's good. A lot of people were really ripping Mark Davis. You got to do this. You got to do this. You don't have to do it the first day. You don't. You can see who else is out there. You can see if somebody else bigger wants to come and talk to them. You can kind of figure it out, and then you make a decision like that. It was in good time. He hasn't lost any coordinators, that he might want to hire. So I think this was a good thing. And you mentioned Max Crosby. Not only did he support him, there were rumors that he would ask for a trade if Antonio Pierce. But you can't hire just because of that. He's popular, so we're going to hire him. But I think this was, unless Bill Belichick says, I want to come coach your team, unless Jim Harbaugh says, Mr. Davis, I want to come coach your team, I think this is, you cannot just bring a coordinator in who wasn't Antonio Pierce and say, we want him instead of him. This was the right move.
Yeah, it's a great point by you, Paul. And I think with Antonio Pierce, it's someone that, like you said, he's got his work cut out in front of him. He's got to find a coordinator. He's got to find probably a quarterback. They still don't have a GM yet hired, but to your point, they didn't rush into this hire. They gauged the market. And real quick, Paul, can you just say how incredible this free agent coaching market is? The names that we're seeing out there with Belichick, Vrabel, Pete Carroll, Jim Harbaugh possibility. I mean, these are legendary names in the coaching industry. And the fact that Antonio Pierce was able to carve himself out a job here, one of the 32, it's pretty impressive by him.
Well, look, anytime the arguably or one of the top 2 or 3 best coaches in NFL history is a free agent. Bill Parcells was a free agent at one time. Guys become free agents. Vince Lombardi went from the Packers to Washington. It does happen, but right, Bill Belichick is his own entity. And so it looks like from what you're hearing is that he and Atlanta Falcons are close. That would be interesting. Look, Jim Harbaugh will get a job if he wants one. Yep. And he doesn't have the craziest demands ever. He's that kind of a coach. He will get a job. I don't know. I think Pete Carroll's maybe more of an acquired taste. At his age, it has to be the right fit. It has to be right. He's kind of a eccentric in his own ways, although a terrific coach. Mike Vrabel will get a job, I would assume, unless his asking price is too much. So, there's good guys out there. There'll be a few surprise hires, I'm sure. Look, the Raiders are a historic marquee team. They haven't been a really relevant playoff type team in a long time, but it's a big job. It's Vegas. And I can't see Antonio Pierce going to work in like Jacksonville. No. There's only a few places where he should be working right now. And I think Raiders black and silver is a nice touch for him.
It really is. And that's a nice way to put it all with Antonio Pierce, now officially the head coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. Paul, we appreciate you giving us some time and some insight on Antonio Pierce, the type of man and coach he's going to be hopefully for this Raiders team. Thank you so much, man.
You got it. Take care.